The following program, Search the Scriptures, is brought to you by the Highway 5 South Church of Christ in Mountain Home. Speakers are Keith Sharp and Trevor Campbell. We invite you to call or write the church to submit questions for the speakers to answer. We'll provide answers from the Bible to your questions.
Trevor, when is Jesus coming again?
Good question.
Well, can you answer that question?
No.
Okay, well, guess what? I can't either. We're going to talk about those signs of the times today, and we're going to finish our discussion we've been doing for several weeks now on Matthew chapter 24. We'll bring that discussion to a close today. We may have to hit the ground running and go pretty fast, but we'll try not to go so fast that we leave everybody behind. But that's what we're going to do today. Good evening. I'm Keith Sharp. I preach at the Highway 5 South Church of Christ in Mountain Home. We invite you to come to our services at the Highway 5 South Church of Christ, 1 mile south of the Highway 62 412 bypass on the left as you're going down towards Mountain View. We have our Bible classes at Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. We have our worship assembly at 11 o'clock and another at 2 o'clock on Sunday. And then we have a Wednesday assembly and Bible study at 7 o'clock in the evening. And we have a ladies' Bible class that we invite all you ladies to come to. It's an excellent Bible class. It won't be meeting again until in January. They're going to cancel the ladies' class for the holidays. But we do invite you ladies to keep that in mind. I'm going to turn it over to Trevor now. And Trevor, let you introduce yourself and tell us about Payette.
Yeah, my name is Trevor Campbell, and I worship and preach at Payette. And we are on the north side of the highway there, right there in the middle of Payette on the highway. And you'll see there the meeting times. We meet on Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. For a Bible class, and then at 10:45 we have worship. You'll also see the phone number there. You can contact me there. That's 870-435-2737. And if you have any questions or any questions for this program.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. What we do on this program, as Trevor has indicated, is answer Bible questions concerning the Bible, concerning our soul salvation, that those who view the program give to us. I was given this question some time ago to please explain Matthew chapter 24. And so that's what we've been doing. We're going to wrap that up today, and we're going to follow a little bit of different format. But before I begin, let me remind you of how to get in touch with us and to give us a question. If you want to give me a question, Keith Sharp, then you can call me at 870-321-5746. Or you can email me at keithsharp@suddenlink.net. Or you can write to Post Office Box 263 in Mountain Home, 72654. We'd be delighted to have your question. That's what we do on this program, is to answer the questions you have. Now, Trevor, remind them, please, of how to be in touch with you.
Yeah, by phone, 870-435-2737 is the number.
Okay, so if you have a Bible question, then please let us know what that Bible question is. I want to begin the program. I'm not going to take the entire program, not by any stretch, but I'm going to begin the program by giving my explanation of Matthew chapter 25, Matthew chapter 24, beginning in verse 35 to the end of the chapter. And to do that, I'm going to get the context. And then we're going to turn it over to Trevor, and he's going to take the remainder of the program to give his explanation of the same passage. And so you can consider both those explanations. Now, the disciples posed 3 questions that Jesus answers in this chapter. And by the way, we've noted the parallel chapters in Mark chapter 13 and in Luke chapter 21. But in Matthew chapter 24, verse 3, Peter, Andrew, James, and John had this question. Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be?" And the things of which he had been speaking was that not one stone would be left on another in the Jewish temple. So it's the destruction of the temple that he'd been talking about. But they added 2 other questions. And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And I want to talk about those 2 questions, the sign of your coming and of the end of the age. Now, in answering the question concerning the destruction of the Jerusalem and the destruction of the Jewish temple, Jesus gives definite signs by which they could know that was going to occur. But then he says in verse 34 that all these things, assuredly I say to you, this is Matthew 24, verse 34, assuredly I say to you, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. So all of those signs that Jesus gave were fulfilled by the time that generation was over. That was the destruction of the Jewish temple and the destruction of the Jewish nation, the city of Jerusalem, that took place at the work of Titus, the Roman general, and the Roman army, 67 to 70 AD. So that was fulfilled at that time. But then there's two other questions. What will be the sign, or what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Now I would look at that phrase, or that word coming. That's the Greek word parousia. And that word is used 22 times in the New Testament. The Greek word studies all say that word always means a literal presence, not a figurative coming. Now there is a figurative coming that Jesus talks about, and that's mentioned many times in the Scriptures. Isaiah chapter 19 is an example of that. But there is a literal coming. Jesus is literally coming again. And I believe that's what, when Jesus answers this question, he answers concerning his literal coming again. In Matthew 24, verse 3, now look at verse 27. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. That's that same word, parousia, coming. And I believe his point is, you won't have to worry about signs when Jesus literally comes again, because everybody will see and know that Jesus has come again. Then in verse 37, he says, but as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. So I believe he's talking about his literal coming again there. The same thing in verse 39. And did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Now those passages, I believe, are talking about the literal second coming of Jesus Christ. Let me give you another. As I say, there's 22 occurrences of this word in the New Testament. Let me give you another example of the use of that word in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 22 through 24. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 22 through 24. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive. But each in his own order, Christ the firstfruits, afterward those who are Christ at his coming, parousia. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, when he puts an end to all rule and authority and power. So that's the coming, I believe, that he's talking about, his literal coming again. Now I believe that through verse 34 of Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is talking to them about the signs of the end of the Jewish nation, the city of Jerusalem, and the Jewish temple. But when he uses the statement in Matthew chapter 24, verse 35, Matthew chapter 24, verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. That he makes a transition to the passing away of the heaven and the earth. There's another reason, there's actually several more reasons I believe that. He uses the phrase, the end of the age. Now go back to the original question in Matthew 24, verse 3. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? That phrase, the end of the age, is only used 4 times in the Bible. All 4 times it's used in the book of Matthew. And I believe Jesus had already shown them what he meant by the phrase, the end of the age. In the parables in Matthew chapter 13, Jesus is explaining the parable of the tares. And I just want, for sake of time, to get verses 39, 40 through 42. He says, the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. The Son of Man will send out his, I'm skipped over, verse 40. Therefore, as the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of this age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all things that offend and those who practice lawlessness, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Now he shows what he means by the end of the age. He's talking about the time when Jesus comes again, literally comes again, in the judgment of the world. Now the second time that phrase is used is Matthew 24:3. The disciples ask about the signs of the end of the age. And by the way, there are no such signs. There are no signs by which we can know when Jesus shall return. Then in Matthew chapter 28 verse 20, this is the last time the phrase the end of the age is used in the Bible. Let's get verses 19 and 20. This is the Great Commission. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen. Jesus is with his disciples to this world is no more, till he comes again literally in the judgment of the world. And so from those two reasons, I believe that Jesus, beginning in Matthew chapter 25, is not talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. He's not talking about the destruction of the Jewish temple. He's not talking about the destruction of the Jewish nation, but he's talking about his literal coming again in the judgment of the world. Now, I want to notice some other differences between the passage before Matthew 24:34 and the passage after Matthew chapter 24. Before Matthew chapter 24, verse 34, Jesus talks about the days. He uses the word days in plural. It would be the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. Notice, for example, this phrase days, or the word days, used in Matthew 24, verse 19. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And by the way, it wouldn't make any difference at all on Jesus' second coming, whether somebody's pregnant or nursing a baby. That would have no relevance whatsoever. There wouldn't be any fleeing anyway. It's all going to be over in an instant. And so that shows he's talking about an age or a time when things are taking place, and there's signs of that, the days. The same thing is used in verse 29, where he's quoting from Daniel chapter 9. And it's these days. And so those are days that he's talking about there. But notice, when he turns back, I believe, to look at the end of the world, in Matthew 24, verse 36, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but the Father only. So now he's talking about a specific day and a specific hour, not a series of days, not a group of days, not a period of time, but an exact time down to the very day and the very hour. And by the way, he gives no signs whatsoever of that. Now, concerning the days of the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, the disciples could know. They had signs that those were taking place. Look at verse 33. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. And so they could know that the time of the destruction of the temple was upon them by the signs that Jesus gave of those things. But of Jesus' second coming, there's no signs. Verse 36, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. By the way, Mark adds in Mark chapter 13, verses 31 through 33, that not even the Son of Man knows, not even Jesus knows when that time is, when that day is. There were warning signs concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. Those warning signs, for example, in Matthew 24, verses 32 and 33. But there are no warning signs about Jesus' second coming. Look at verse 44. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. People won't be expecting him. Even the disciples won't be expecting him. He's talking to his disciples here. We don't know. So we have no idea when Jesus is coming again. There are no signs of the times. Now I want to look at one other thing, and then I'm going to stop and turn it over to Trevor for him to present his explanation of Matthew 24, verses 35 to the end of the chapter. But I want to look at the following context of verse 35. If you look at Matthew chapter 24, verses 45 through 51, Jesus tells them to be faithful, to be ready. And that being ready is for the judgment. The master, I'm looking at verses 50 and 51. The master of that servant will come on a day when he's not looking for him, at an hour that he's not aware of, will cut him in two and appoint him his portion with the hypocrites. There should be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I believe that's an obvious reference to the day of judgment. Those who are not ready for the Lord's return will be cast into hell. Then Matthew chapter 25 is a part of the same context. It's a continuation of that same context. In Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 through 13, is the parable of the 10 virgins. Verse 13 is the lesson. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. We have to watch in order to be ready. We don't know when He's coming. And so we have to be watching at all times for the coming of the Lord. Then in verses 14 through 30, He gives another parable, the parable of the talents. And the lesson of the parable of the talents is we must be working in order to be ready for the Lord's coming. If we're not working, then we're going to be cast into outer darkness. There should be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's a picture of those who are not ready for the Lord's second coming. And then finally, verses 31 through 46 is actually the picture of the judgment. And so the following context is the context of the judgment. Those are the reasons that I believe from Matthew 24, beginning in verse 35 to the end of the chapter, He's talking about His literal second coming. There are no signs of that. Now let's take just a moment to remind people of how to be in touch with us, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Trevor. Trevor, how can they be in touch with you?
You can phone me, 870-435-2737.
Okay, and be in touch with him that way. You can call me, Keith Sharp, at 870-321-5746. You can email me at keithsharp@sunlink.net, or you can write to Post Office Box 263 in Mountain Home, 72654. Trevor, the remainder of the program is yours.
All right, in Matthew 24, in verse 35, heaven and earth passing away, I don't believe it's a change in subject matter. I believe He's already described heaven and earth passing away in the chapter. The idea here set forth is the idea of the old covenant world passing away, along with its people passing away. Back in verse 29 of the chapter, He talks about the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And we looked at that in a previous episode, but that's talking about the defeat of a nation. You know, during the time after Christ died, when Christ died, the old covenant was nailed to the cross. It was abolished. However, and the new covenant, I should say, was established, and it was established in His blood. However, there were Israelites still practicing the old law. Well, those individuals would be punished because they did not obey the great prophet, Jesus Christ. They did not hear Him. And so that is the nation that's defeated there in verse 29. They're the ones who are going to suffer. And so literally that old covenant world is going to go away along with its people. They're going to be defeated. But there's a new reality and a new heavens and a new earth that remains. In verse 31 of the chapter, He says, "And He will send His angels, and with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together His elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other." And so these individuals, His elect, are His saints, His followers, and they are part of that new reality, that new heavens, that new earth, the new covenant world. So the old passes away and the new remains. As far as verse 36, the day and hour, no one knowing, the word "but" there is not a change in the subject matter. I believe it's a continuation of the thought. It's like saying moreover. Heaven and earth are going to pass away, but no one knows the day or hour, He says, only the Father. Now, what's interesting is to understand this passage, I believe we need to understand Oriental culture. In the Oriental culture at this time, it was only the father who knew the date of a wedding when a man and woman were to be married. So basically, if a man and woman were to be married, they were betrothed, and that betrothal lasted for a year. During that time period, they're called husband and wife, but they're not living together. But it's called the betrothal. And so you were betrothed for a period of time. The actual date of the wedding was only known to the father of the bridegroom. And I think that's what Jesus is referencing here. he's referencing the fact that he is the bridegroom. And this goes along with his teachings in Matthew chapter 25. As Brother Keith mentioned earlier, he tells the parable regarding the kingdom of heaven about the 10 virgins. Well, the 10 virgins, there's no time to read it right now, but if you read that story, the 10 virgins are waiting for the bridegroom. And I think Jesus is tying all these things together. The fact that he's the bridegroom, the idea of only the Father knowing just refers to the fact that he's the bridegroom. And these folks are waiting for him to come. At the end of the story of the 10 virgins and the bridegroom, in verse 13 he says, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." All right, so they were waiting for the bridegroom to return, and he did so in the first century. This also goes along with the teachings of the Apostle Paul. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 2, the Apostle Paul tells the church at Corinth, he says, "I've betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you a chaste virgin to Christ." So he was referring to the church at that time being betrothed, but the marriage hadn't taken place yet. Corinth, the church at Corinth, and all the church for that matter, was waiting for the bridegroom to come. And what he was going to do was come and finish the restoration, to make a restoration of all things. Out with the old, he was going to eliminate that old covenant world, and the new would remain. I want to go to Acts chapter 3 for just a moment. I know Brother Keith did the same thing. We're going through these things really quickly. But hopefully you can kind of keep up and understand what we're trying to say. In Acts chapter 3, though, and in verse 19, the Apostle Peter is speaking here, and he says, "Repent therefore and be converted, that your sins may be blotted out, so that times of refreshing may come from the presence of the Lord, and that he may send Jesus Christ, who was preached to you before, whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of all his holy prophets since the world began." This times of restoration is what we're seeing in Matthew chapter 24 and also in Matthew chapter 25. Jesus was going to eliminate the old covenant world. It was going to pass away and be destroyed. What would remain is the new covenant world, a new heavens and a new earth, a new reality, if you will, his kingdom and his people. And as we saw earlier in Matthew chapter 24, he would have his elect. He would still have a nation. Regarding the heavens and the earth passing away, though, I also want to go to Hebrews, the 12th chapter. In Hebrews chapter 12, and I want to begin reading at verse 22. Now we're picking up in the middle of the context here, of the text here, but to kind of give you the context, he's been talking about the giving of the old law and how terrifying that was there at Mount Sinai, and how scary it was for the people and for Moses, for that matter, too. Well, in verse 22, he says, but you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels. All right, so what's going to happen in the first century? Well, Jerusalem, the physical Jerusalem, is going to pass away. And that old covenant world is going to go away, and it's going to pass away. But what remains here, the writer says, is a heavenly Jerusalem. You know, in John chapter 4, again, we don't have time to go to all these passages, but in John chapter 4, you can check these things, Jesus talks with a Samaritan woman. And he tells that woman, he says, the hour is coming in which you will not worship at Jerusalem, but those who worship the Father will worship in spirit and in truth. And I believe this ties in. The idea of that physical Jerusalem is going to go away, that place of worship. But what will remain is the spiritual Jerusalem. Now I'm going to continue reading. He says, you have also come, in 23, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel. See then that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape, who refused him who spoke on earth, how much more will we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven? Whose voice then shook the earth? But now he has promised, saying, yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. Now this yet once more indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. All right, I'm going to pause there for a moment. So he mentions the idea of heaven and earth shaking. Now this comes from the prophet Haggai. And this was an Old Testament prophecy. During Haggai's time, God had recently shook the earth. The Babylonians had defeated the Israelites. captured them, took them captive, destroyed Jerusalem and its temple. During the time of Haggai, a remnant of the people had returned to Jerusalem, and they had rebuilt the temple. And that's when this prophecy is given. So he had shaken the earth then. He had destroyed Israel with the Babylonians, and just a remnant returned. Well, he says once more in verse 27, once more he's going to shake heaven and earth, and he says that indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken. Well, what did he say was going to shake? Heaven and earth. And he says it's the removal of those things. Well, it's not the literal heavens and the earth that he's talking about, but the idea was back then he shook that nation, and he had that nation defeated, that nation of Israel. Well, he's going to do it one more time. That is one last time. This nation is going to be defeated. And that old covenant world and its people, that world is going to pass away. As he says there, it's going to be removed. But notice there's something that remains. He says that something can remain that will not be shaken. And then in verse 28, he says, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. That kingdom is the kingdom of Jesus Christ. It's not going to be shaken. It's not going to go away. It can never be defeated. So the idea of the heavens and the earth passing away was simply talking about the old covenant world and its people going away. But there remained a new heavens, a new earth, a new reality, and this would never be shaken. It would never go away. Now I'm going to go back to Matthew chapter 24. And we just got a brief bit of time left here. But in Matthew chapter 24, I want to look at verse 40 and verse 41. There's a passage here in which says, then 2 men will be in one field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. And I again believe that this is all part of the destruction of Jerusalem and the things going on there. This idea of taken and left, well, in Luke chapter 17, there's Jesus talks about the destruction of Jerusalem. And again, I don't have time to go there right now, but you can check it for yourself. In Luke 17 is a description of the destruction of Jerusalem that was going to take place. Now, Jesus uses some of the same language. One person taken, another left. The disciples ask, where, Lord? Where are they going to be taken? And Jesus makes it very clear that they're going to be dead bodies. He's referring to the fact that people's lives will be taken. He says, wherever the corpse is, there the eagles will be gathered together also, referring to dead bodies. So people's lives will be taken. But what about those that are left? Well, this is spoken to people that are under the old law, under the old covenant. And so we have to go back to the old law to understand these things. I'm going to go to Leviticus chapter 26. I've only got about a minute left, so I've got to hurry here. But in Leviticus chapter 26, God speaks about the vengeance of the covenant. That is, if his people broke his law, what would take place? In verse 31, he says, I will lay your cities waste and bring your sanctuaries to desolation, and I will not smell the fragrance of your sweet aromas. I will bring the land to desolation, and your enemies who dwell in it shall be astonished at it. Now I'm going to skip down to verse 36. You can see he's talking about destruction there. In verse 36, he says, and as for those of you who are left, all right, so this is part of the law. Those who are left, I will send faintness into your hearts in the lands of their enemies. The sound of a shaken leaf shall cause them to flee, and they shall flee as though fleeing from a sword. They shall fall when no one pursues. And if you continue, he's talking about the fact that these left will go into captivity. So I believe all these things deal with the old covenant world passing away. And I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching Search the Scriptures. If you have a Bible question or comment, you may call 870-321-5746, email keithsharp@suddenlink.net, or write Keith Sharp at P.O. Box 263, Mountain Home, Arkansas 72654. And your question will be answered on the air. Be sure to watch next week at the same time for another edition of Search the Scriptures. Until then, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.